Storm, a Marvel fanfiction written on AO3 by Peter X. Hart. The link for this fanfiction will be in the description box below, so I encourage you all to go check it out. New York had not gotten a storm like this forever, with the wind whipping around unbelievably hard and lightning cracking and rain pouring. And what was just peachy about all that was that his apartment's power conked out, and he had absolutely no idea of what to do. Aunt May was in Florida, visiting her friend, so he couldn't even seek comfort in her through all this. Peter had always been afraid of lightning ever since he was a little kid, so each strike of lightning outside made him jump a little in fear as he sat huddled with his blanket in his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. The sounds were too loud for his enhanced senses, and he definitely couldn't go outside to walk to Ned's, and he couldn't drive anywhere, since he didn't have his license, so he was practically on house arrest. His heart was racing, and it did not help that every lightning strike kept happening every 30 or so seconds. Miraculously, cell surface was still functioning, so at least he has some way to contact someone if it all became too much. Peter forced himself to exit his room and grab a glass of water, but nearly punched a wall when he realized that no power meant that the faucet wouldn't work. Okay, time to call someone. He climbed back up onto his bed, jumping at the sound of lightning, and scrolled through his contacts. He thought about calling Ned or MJ, but their power was probably out too. There was no reason to call May, and Peter was running out of options. Then his eyes fell on Tony Stark's contact. His thumb hovered over it, and he was so caught up in contemplating calling him that he practically screamed when the loudest strike of lightning he ever heard in his entire life filled his ears, and he started to experience sensory overload with the bright light from the phone screen burning his eyes, causing them to fill up with tears. He was panicking, and didn't have any control over his body when he tapped Tony's number and pressed the phone to his ear. Kid? Peter almost sobbed in relief. Hey, Mr. Stark. What's up? Tony said, casually. Suddenly, Peter felt like the biggest loser in the entire world. Is it possible he'd maybe pick me up? He was doing such a good job of keeping his panic contained, if he did say so himself. Why? Are you okay? Is this about the storm? Peter scrubbed his eyes, tears beginning to build. Yeah, it's kind of a lot for me to take right now, and I'm kind of scared of lightning. Also, there's no water. I can come get you, Tony said, and Peter breathed out a sigh of relief. Give me 20 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Stark. Peter breathed in and out, and the line went dead. He shut his phone off in his pocket and scrubbed his eyes again. The lightning struck and Peter jumped, the sound hurting his head. He pressed his palms against his ears, as tight as possible, and squeezed his eyes shut. Peter didn't know how long he sat there, trying to fight the ongoing panic that didn't go away, and only increased each time lightning struck, making his temples pound. He certainly didn't hear his doors open, nor the footsteps of a certain billionaire walking towards him. So he couldn't help but shriek when he felt hands touching him and his eyes opened, only to focus on the concerned face of one Tony Stark. Tears of relief immediately filled his eyes. Hi, he whispered. You okay, kid? Tony asked, gently, resting one hand on Peter's arm. Jesus, you're shaking like a car. Peter couldn't help but lean into the touch, embarrassment heating up his cheeks. Sorry, it's a sensory overload panic attack thing, Peter said, quietly. Tony frowned softly. Oh. Just then, lightning struck again, and Peter jumped and covered his ears, ripping himself away from the hand on his arm, even though he needed the comfort. Hey, Tony said softly, and suddenly Peter's face had pressed into his shoulder, and he couldn't help but sob as Tony wrapped his arms around the boy, holding him tight. You're okay, kiddo. It hurts, Peter whimpered. I know it does, Tony whispered, rubbing his hand through Peter's hair comfortingly. Peter's grip tightened on Tony's t-shirt, and he tried to pull himself closer. Tony, seemingly understanding, hugged Peter tighter. A wet laugh left Peter's mouth. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm crying. It's okay, Tony interrupted. It's just me here. You can cry all you want. Peter nodded and closed his eyes, relaxing in the hug and letting himself bask in the comfort and letting tears slide down his face slowly, unsure if they were from pain, relief, fear, probably relief. After about a minute, Tony said, You ready to go now? Sure, Peter said, pulling away. Tony regarded the tears on his face and slipped his sleeve over his hand and raised it up to wipe Peter's cheeks dry, with a parental sensation that made Peter's heart warm. He found himself leaning into the touch again. After a few seconds, Tony dropped his hands. Peter instantly missed the comfort. Tony seemed to pick up on that right away. He wrapped one arm around Peter's shoulder and led him down to the car. Peter stopped walking right before they were about to go outside. watching the sky, waiting for lightning to come and scare the shit out of him again. Tony looked down at him with a gentle smile. "It's okay, kid." They made it to the car smoothly. The ride to the compound was quick and easy. Tony muted what was going on outside so Peter didn't have to worry about the sensory overload resurfacing. Back at the compound, they settled down on the couch to watch a movie. Peter's eyes flicked to his mentor, and he was suddenly very aware he had a weird urge to want to cuddle. They just shared their first hug, and Peter was wondering if cuddling was maybe a little bit too much too quick. Needless to say, he shuffled forward an inch closer every few seconds. His eyes flickered up to Tony again. His breath caught in his throat when he realized Tony was watching him with a very amused expression. "Hi," Peter squeaked. Tony snorted. "Hi, what are you up to?" I was just, Tony laughed. "You're hilarious." He lifted his arm, signaling Peter to come closer. "Come here, kid." Peter smiled sheepishly and scooted closer, snuggling into Tony's side. Peter blushed all the way up to his hairline. Tony laughed. "It's all right, kid. I don't mind." Peter hesitantly snuggled closely, and Tony reciprocated. Tony gave good hugs, and Peter was starting to wonder if Pepper bullied him into doing it right. The joke slipped out before Peter could regain his self-control. "It's not a hug, I'm just grabbing the remote." Tony barked out a laugh and then sobered up. "Whoa there, Pete." "What a relief. I really like your hugs." "Yeah?" Tony said, looking back down at him with a smile. Peter smiled back.